Friday. It's In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you, per usual, per always. Imagine if one day someone else just came on here and said, "Hey, welcome into In Touch. I'm not John Alden. I'm Hoosie Wutsy." All right, we're off to a weird start here on a Friday, but I hope you've had a good week. I've had a good week. I'm ready for the weekend, ready for a little rest. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not looking forward to talking Indiana basketball today. And I'm sure many of you maybe aren't even looking forward to hearing about Indiana basketball just because it feels like we're going in circles, right? We get ourselves excited, we get let down, then they do something that gets our spirits up again, and then we get let down. It's just we're running in circles. We're going in circles with Indiana basketball, and we have been for over a year now. Last year, it was a little more, it felt more like a one-off initially. Like, okay, this is just a down year. They'll respond and things will be on the upswing next season, referring to this season now. And really, since the battle for Atlantis, we've been in this never-ending cycle of getting disappointed and then, as I mentioned already, the ups and downs of things going well and then things not going so well. And as you know, based on the tone of the show in the early going here, you know that we're in one of the downs. And coming off of the Northwestern loss 79-70, and in the manner in which it happened, it probably doesn't make a lot of Indiana fans feel good about the rest of the season. Now, no matter how you feel about it, there is still a decent amount of season left. Now, does that mean anything? Does that mean that Indiana is going to take advantage of those situations? I mean, time will tell, but based on current results and everything that's already happened in the last, this season and the season before, you have good reason to believe that Indiana will not do what is necessary to relinquish the season and make the NCAA tournament. Not only make it, but make it comfortably, right? That's something that I think is kind of a checkbox, right? For Indiana fans to be a little more satisfied. Don't just make the tournament, get in the first four, get in comfortably and do something with it. I think if Indiana were to do enough to make the Dayton first round again, the first four, I think that would be probably the most divisive way, for fans going into the offseason. I do think people would lean more heavily into, okay, you know what, this is still disappointment. This is not where Indiana basketball should be. Indiana should move on from Mike Woodson. I think that would be the general average consensus if Indiana did get to that point. But here's the other thing, and I think we've talked about this before when we were just discussing like what scenarios keep Mike Woodson at the helm for another season. What if Indiana got in and into the first four, but then they go on a run similar to what NC State did last year and just somehow magically finds themselves in the Final Four? I mean, of course, if any sort of magical run will buy your coach a number of time or a number of years or seasons, whatever it may be. And one thing I'm trying to do right now, I'm trying to take a look at what NC State in particular is doing this season, because I don't know how much I've talked about it on here, but I've had conversations with people about, a fluky Final Four, like what really, like how much can you really take into consideration a fluky Final Four run? NC State, coming off that fluky Final Four, not really doing a whole lot with their season. They're 9-9 overall, 2-5 in conference. And so again, a coach who was more than likely going to be fired, and I can't think of his name right now, the NC State head coach, but he was somebody who was likely going to be let go at the end of last season. But because of the fluky Final Four run, he was allowed to, he was given some grace, and probably more than a little grace. He probably got some bonuses for making the Final Four, right? Whenever you do something like that, that's worth celebrating. But because of that, He was, of course, retained, and now they're suffering through more mediocrity at in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm curious though, what would, and I guess this conversation isn't really worth having, because as it stands right now, Indiana is, unless something changes, and again, this is why I mentioned earlier that there's plenty of season left. At the way things currently stand, Indiana is not going anywhere with the postseason, and I'm not sure how much the team realizes that at the moment. I'm sure there has to be some sense of urgency, especially after their most recent loss to Northwestern. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to get into a few other things here in just a moment. I'm going to pause here for just a second, though. Sorry about that. Needed to pause and catch my breath for a second. I don't know what. I guess I'm just having one of those moments where I just need to relax and calm down and recalibrate. I'm so stressed out about this Indiana basketball team. I'm tired of going in circles. And we're going to hit on a couple of different things today. I'm going to read some YouTube comments. One of them, for sure, I'm going to read is one that got cut out of the episode last Friday. Last Friday, the episode that I had to redo in a little bit of different way because of the unfortunate StreamYard issue that I ran into. So I'm going to go over that comment again and kind of share my thoughts whenever we get to the YouTube comment section of the show. But I do want to start here. This is, of course, I'm going to say, of course, you don't know what I'm going to say. This is Ben Stevens. He pulled this little stat not for me specifically, but put this on Twitter after Indiana had lost to Northwestern earlier this week. And this is what it says. Mike Woodson was hired as Indiana's head coach on March 28th, 2021. Woodson has now faced Northwestern 5 times. The Hoosiers have lost all 5 games. The last time IU lost 5 games in a row to Northwestern was between the years 1913 and 1915, 110 years ago. So that means, basically what that means is not a single living human being has seen that happen, right? And he finishes that tweet by saying that it's a sign of the times. I don't know exactly what he's getting at with that. This is a sign of the state of Indiana basketball is kind of the way I looked at it. But I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of back at that crossroads, and it's a little bit different. We do know a lot more about this team, especially now that Malik Renew is back. And of course, there was the decision to go big at the end of the game against Northwestern that, it just didn't work, right? And when you were forced to not use that lineup when Malik Renew was injured, you got credit for how well that was working out, even though that more than likely wasn't Mike Woodson's decision. Like, he wouldn't have gone that way had he had Malik Renew available. And to see him go with that, realize it's not working, and then not really do much to change it until it was too late, that is, it's just another example of Mike Woodson's stubbornness. And I'll give him props, though, too. And this isn't necessarily a good thing if you're a fan like myself, but he sticks to what he believes in. And there's good and bad that comes with that. And of course, the bad is, the stubbornness that will lead you to just doing things and not wanting to change, even when you don't really have, at least it seems like you don't have much of a choice. So that's kind of where we're at. And Alec Lasley and I are going to discuss this a little bit further, and he'll share his thoughts on the result this past week and a little bit looking ahead. And they've got not quite, I'm not going to call, there's nothing worth calling a tune-up at this point. You're in conference play. Everything is going to be difficult in one way, shape, or form, as opposed to when you're playing, the Chattanoogas and the Winthrops of the world. But Maryland, nonetheless, and they're now coming off of a victory against Illinois on the road, team that blew you out of the water in your own gymnasium. And I say that jokingly. I know it's a high-level basketball arena, but with Maryland getting that win, they'll of course come into Assembly Hall East, if you will, since Illinois' arena used to be called Assembly Hall, Spaceship Assembly Hall, as many, including myself, like to refer to it as. But they'll come to Indiana this weekend feeling good after their Illinois win. And I think this game this Sunday, if they lose it, should I just be ready to say I keep really, like, you can probably tell throughout the first, through this entire opening segment, if you will, that it's almost like I'm afraid to just come right out and say it, right? And the interview that, or the discussion between Alec Lasley and I was recorded last night. So my attitude and mood toward things were a little bit different than they are right now. But it feels like I'm just afraid to just say, you know what, it's done. This isn't going to work. And I think part of it is the aftermath of my conversation with Ant Wright. It's one of those things where I look at the opportunity ahead, not even just the Maryland game this Sunday, but the quad one wins that are up for grabs in the next 4 to 5 games, maybe even 6 games. I can't remember exactly. There's so much that if, and it's a very, very, very big if Indiana can somehow figure it out, there's a lot there that can truly turn the season around. Now, me stating that fact, sometimes I feel like I always need to preface things with this. Me stating that that's a possibility, it does not mean that I am predicting that that's what's going to happen. Okay? It just means that, this is college basketball, right? Teams mess up all the time. You catch a team on a bad night, you can get them, no matter how good they are. If Indiana catches Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin, any of those teams that are coming up on a bad night, you can win all those games, okay? And maybe that doesn't really say much about Indiana, but it would still benefit them to win those games because of how good those other teams have been so far this year. And so that's why I'm hesitant to just flat out say the season's over. And, I'm not kind of like that anyway. If you've been around long enough, not only for this show, but if you've seen any of the shows I've done in the past, I don't really like to give up on any team too easily. Now, if this team was, 8-10 or something like that right now, that's a different story. You have a losing record and there's nothing you're really playing for, especially with Indiana. But this team, it's done what every Mike Woodson team has done. They beat the teams they're supposed to beat, except Northwestern. And I don't even know if they were favored against Northwestern the other night. I don't remember looking at the spread for that game. But Mike Woodson teams, they beat who they're supposed to beat. And then they don't really do much else than that. They've never had a bad loss, which is now bad loss when it comes to, like, they've never lost to a quad 4. I'm talking about that type of bad loss. If you're talking about bad losses in terms of you've gotten your ass beat, yeah, that's happened all but one time this season. I'm not including the Northwestern game by 9 points as an ass whooping. It's a disappointing performance and disappointing outcome, but that does not fall into the same category as the previous losses that have occurred this year. So we'll see what happens against Maryland on Sunday. I'll be doing post-game wrap-up on that afternoon. At games at 12 o'clock. We'll do post-game as soon as the game ends. I don't know if it'll be Kyler Staley with me or one of the others, but somebody will be there to do post-game wrap-up with me, and we'll react to everything that happens on the floor. Be sure to subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated right here on YouTube. And if you want to be notified of when we go live or when any other videos are uploaded, hit that notifications bell, if you please. Or if it pleases you, s'il vous plaît, as one of my teachers used to say that. I'm not sure if he's, I know he's an Indiana fan. Back in elementary school, I had a teacher named Joshua Emily, and I remember he would, he just, one of the things he would do is say s'il vous plaît. He had a number of different things. A lot of teachers have their own little antics. They'll say certain things a certain way, and it's just like part of their brand, kind of similar to personalities on radio, YouTube, TV, whatever it may be. But he used to say, s'il vous plaît, if he would ask a question, if it pleases you, is what that meant, is what I remember that meaning in Spanish. So Shout out to Mr. Emily from back one of my teachers from way back yonder, way back when I was a wee lad in elementary school. With that being said, let's go ahead and transition into our segment with Alec Lasley, talking all things Indiana basketball as we try to figure out what's going on. This isn't as fun as football season, as you could probably tell. Football was, I'm ready to go off onto a tangent, so we'll save it for later, whether it be this episode or some other time. But it's just not, the vibes are different. The vibes are different around Indiana basketball as opposed to what happened during the football season. So let's welcome in Alec Lasley, and we'll continue to talk all things Hoosiers. And we have a little bit of football stuff, since we were just talking about football. One little football question squeezed in at the end for your listening, viewing pleasure. So without further ado, from HoosierIllustrated.com, joining us once again here on In Touch with Indiana Sports, it is publisher of HoosierIllustrated.com, Mr. Alec Lasley. Welcome in. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I was talking to Ant the other day, of course, and talked a little bit about how ridiculous this snow has been for the last 3 weeks. And I like snow. I like the wintertime more than most people, but 3 weeks of this is a little much. And I'm ready for a bit of a warm up over these next few days.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think just about everyone is, especially with, we talked about it a few minutes ago too, before we jumped on here. The fact that it's now a heat wave at 20 degrees, and I think we're all excited about that. But no, it has been brutal. I think everyone's over the snow at this point, or the ice that is on the road, and in the backyard. But I think we're all ready to turn the page there.
But here's the thing: it's only January. Who knows what's
I
going to
know
happen
that's
over
the scary
the next
part.
6 to 8 weeks.
That's the scary part. Yeah. Typically, it's not like this, so fingers crossed. But hopefully it gets warmer. Unlike the shooting of Indiana basketball at this point.
Yeah, I guess with that, we'll just jump right in. Indiana falls to Northwestern 79-70 on Wednesday. Game after, it felt like things were changing. And that's really been the story of this Indiana team this year. There's been waves of both positive and negative where you tend to feel like once things shift in one direction, you think they might stay there for a little bit, but then things quickly change and do a complete 180. And not to say it was the absolute worst performance, because this is the first loss where Indiana absolutely didn't get the doors broken off of them. We'll say that. But at the same time, there were moments specifically at the end of the game when Northwestern went on a really big run and Indiana just didn't have a response to that. What are kind of your thoughts on how things played out on Wednesday?
Yeah, I mean, look, the biggest thing with Indiana you can go back to the very beginning of the Mike Woodson era is their inability to play a full 40 minutes. But play, from game to game when other teams are throwing punches, right? Indiana's really struggled to respond to that. And I thought, for the most part, they did a relatively good job for the first, 11 minutes, 31 minutes of that game of actually responding to different punches, whether it was the 10-point deficit early, taking obviously the halftime lead. Obviously they get off to a great start. Northwestern does in the second half, and Indiana responds, ends up taking the lead again after about a 10 or 12-0 run there kind of midway through the second half. And then it was, a little bit of back and forth for the next few minutes, right? They responded to every little quick 4-6-0 spurt by Northwestern. And then it was the couple minute stretch there with the two bigs that killed Indiana. And they were just unable to recover. I think it was a quick 13-0 run, 10-0 run that turned into 21-4. That really just blew the game wide open, and a lot of it had to do with kind of the middle portion of those about 3 or 4 minutes of Malik Renew and Omar Ballo playing together, where Malik Renew went 2 straight possessions, 2 misses, got burned defensively, and then there was 1 or 2 other possessions that Indiana didn't score off of with those 2 bigs in there, and it just spiraled after that. And obviously they did a good job of trying to claw back in at the very, very end. But if you spot someone a 17-point advantage over the course of, I think it was 6.5, 7 minutes, right? That's difficult to come back from regardless of what the score was beforehand. And since it was so close, right, a 17-point advantage is going to hurt a lot more than if you were up double digits. And it's the same thing again with this team, right? Just the inability to really dig deep when things do get super tough. It's been the theme of this Woodson era. And once again, it was the theme on Wednesday for Indiana.
Now that Malik Reneau is back in the lineup and we've seen what it looks like when you go back to having both Reneau and Ballo in the game, just off of, first impressions from one game of returning to that, do you think it will be better moving forward for them to stick with that being kind of the original plan? Or do you think, not that we want Reneau to be unhealthy, but do you think it'd be better to experiment with a smaller ball lineup and not utilizing both Reneau and Ballo at the same time?
Yeah, I mean they have to. It's something that right now Malik Reneau should not have been in the game in the second half. He clearly struggled, not only with his elevation but with his toughness, with his conditioning on both ends of the floor. And you were losing way more than you were gaining with him, and it was something where it looked like Mike Woodson was just trying to say, okay, Malik is back. Let's try to get him back in game shape right now. And he said after the game that he was nowhere close to being ready. And so you kind of scratch your head, then why is he playing minutes at a very, very critical moment of the game, right around the under 8 timeout? Why is he in right there? And why is that the first time all night that you're experimenting with two bigs again? Right. So it just seemed like that answer made absolutely no sense for the flow of the game and what his substitution pattern was. And again, a very, very critical moment of that matchup. And it's just something that continues to go back to Mike Woodson's inability to learn from the past. And it's been a huge talking point for numerous years now, ever since he's been here. The inability to take a bad season and learn from it, take a bad game and learn from it long term, right? He's been able to do it in the short term and bounce back, right? We saw that again in the Ohio State game, but able to build on that and compound those good results. He's always, unfortunately, able to compound the bad results, but he's never able to do that with good results. And I mean, it was just a head scratching decision. It killed Indiana last night, and it just made absolutely no sense for what you had going for him. And it was a game that Indiana had to have. When you look at what's obviously coming up over the next 2.5, 3 weeks of the absolute gauntlet of a schedule here, the meat of the Big Ten for Indiana.
And we'll get into that here in just a minute, but you mentioned, you had said something. I was going to do a funny transition, but I'm not going to anymore because it won't be as funny. It probably would have been funny in the first place. But Ty Berry off the bench, 23 points against Indiana. Do you see that being more of Indiana's defensive issues, or is that just somebody who got hot on his home floor against Indiana?
Yeah, so this was one of the biggest frustrations that I had and following that game last night or Wednesday night was their inability to understand that Ty Berry is the absolute X factor of that team. When he scores in double figures, they win. When he hits the first couple threes, he's going to score in double figures. It's something that all you have to do is watch every single game this season. And they were 6-2 in games when he scored in double figures going into Wednesday night. They're now 7-2. They were 5-5 in games when he didn't score in double figures. So there's a clear translation there of when Ty Berry scores the ball, they're going to win games. And the bigger issue is the exact scouting report that you need to have on Ty Berry is you cannot let him get going with the 3 ball. And that was the biggest thing that got him going. He scored before Wednesday night. He scored 10 plus points in 8 games. The other 8 games that they had played in, he had 3 points or less. So like what he does well is going to correspond with a good result for Northwestern. And the biggest thing is he's had multiple threes in all but one of those double-digit scoring games. So everything starts and ends with his ability to get hot from the perimeter. And that's exactly what started on Wednesday. And that's exactly what happened throughout the rest of the game. And they had McKenzie and Baco on him for the majority, I would say between him and Anthony Leal, the majority of the night. And it was embarrassing to watch the ease that Tyberry had getting open looks. There were maybe 2 contested jump shots. He hit 7 or 8 threes, a career high. And out of those, there were maybe 2 contested jumpers. And they were running him off of not difficult screens. They were not complex plays that Tyberry was getting open on. They just were falling asleep defensively. And they did obviously way more of that in the second half than in the first half. But it was just, he was the guy that you could not let get hot, and he did exactly what you couldn't do. And it was frustrating because you knew exactly what to do with him, and there were no complex plays called for him. It was just falling asleep and not being mentally tough in key situations there.
And what blows my mind, not about Tyberry specifically, but the rest of Northwestern's bench didn't do anything. And I don't know how common that is, but I mean,
it's
the majority
it is just Tyberry off of the bench. That is it. And that's the frustrating part, because you look at where their scoring comes from. It's Martinelli and Barnheiser. After that, you have Leach, and then he's a very good third scorer there. But again, you typically need 4 guys who can come in and score the ball. And Tyberry's been there for 5 years, and he's a 3-point shooter at best. I think 67% of his made field goals this season going into Wednesday were 3-point field goals. So you know what he's going to do, and you just let him do exactly what he does best. And that was the frustrating part.
You mentioned Mbaka earlier. He had been in a slump for several games leading up to this one. And it seems, at least other than the fact that Indiana didn't pull this one out, I mean, he did have 20 points. He was Indiana's leading scorer on the night. Do you feel like that's a good sign for him moving forward? Or, was it more of just the matchup against Northwestern for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of both, but I think the good positive that we saw there was he didn't settle to begin the game. I think he had 1 or 2 jumpers that he missed kind of early in that game, but then he started to attack. And whenever you're obviously in a slump, you just want to see the ball go through the basket. He made a couple tough contested layups, and that kind of got him going a little bit. Then he made a 3, I think, early in the second half, that kind of helped get that confidence rolling, and obviously played well down the stretch and made some key shots throughout the second half. But the issue with him, again, is just his inability to guard anything on the other end of the floor. And that's when he's playing at this level consistently offensively, you can live with that. But he's now shown this year how inconsistent he's going to be. And again, we're 20 games in. You kind of are what you are at this point. Unless you're going to go on a huge heater, which, who knows may happen. But he clearly is a very inconsistent piece to the puzzle for this team this season. And that makes it extremely difficult when he's giving up everything on the defensive end. If he's countering all of that by scoring offensively, again, you can live with that, because that's probably going to, just negate itself out on both ends. But he's not able to do that at a consistent point. And that's the difficult part. And now you kind of lose one of your obviously go-to scorers offensively, definitely one of your shooters, and it condenses the floor a bit and puts a lot more pressure on Luke Goody to step up every single night, which, I mean, he's answered the call with that.
Yeah. Luke Goody's had several good moments in the last several games, of course. Against Ohio State, had the big 3 that helped secure the victory, and then 4 or 5 the other night. It is nice to see Indiana have a consistent shooter. It'd be nice if they had more than one, but definitely a step up from previous seasons, at least under Mike Woodson. But I do want to move and look ahead to kind of the coming gauntlet, as you mentioned. And when I was talking with Ann about this the other day, he liked to frame it as more of the opportunities ahead. If you're looking at it from an Indiana standpoint, and your goal is to get back to the NCAA tournament. And I know there's some of you out there listening right now that are like, why are you even talking about the NCAA tournament? And that's totally fine, because I'm in some way, shape, or form, I am with you. I don't necessarily think that Indiana is going to do what I don't want to say should do, but do what maybe the Indiana standard would be, which would be to win a majority of these games. But you can't count out the fact that I do still think, whether they are consistent or not, there is a good talent level on this team. We haven't seen it come together consistently, but I think that's the one thing that you can kind of hang your hat on when it comes to if this team ever puts it all together, it's going to be because that the talent finally meshed and there was kind of, one, just everything comes together. It's really the only way to put it right. And so these next several games, you have Maryland. I don't think this is really a part of the 4 to 5 game gauntlet. This is kind of like your last, I'm not even going to call it a tune-up. It's the last game that if you are going to save your season, we'll say that, you have to win this Maryland game, I feel like. If you start off a 2-game losing streak after that Ohio State win, and then you go into Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan State, I'd be willing to bet you're not going to be, not only are you going to be not favored to win those games, but I'd say there's a good chance that there will come a point where this team could potentially fold, right? We've seen how this team folds on the court, right? And will there come a point where they think, okay, our season's kind of hanging in the balance here? The way they respond to every other sort of adversity, there wouldn't be an indication that they would respond in the correct way, if that makes sense, Alec.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you look at that stretch and it is loaded with opportunities, but those opportunities just don't look as appealing for a team that has been unable to get up for big games like that.
Especially when 3 of those 4 games are on the road. I didn't mention that earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, Indiana has done a decent job on the road for the most part. Surprisingly
Probably because
enough,
their own fans are booing them at Assembly Hall. It'd be more fun playing on the road.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's one thing that I guess you can kind of put in your back pocket for potentially some good omens when those games do come. But Maryland's a tricky team, right? They have the talent. They typically play extremely tough and gritty basketball offensively, right? It's always been kind of an issue in terms of their inability to score on the perimeter. And that's kind of what's been holding them back a little bit. But obviously with Julian Reese, Derek Queen, probably, one of the best front courts there in the Big Ten, extremely dominant in multiple ways and versatile with Derek Queen's passing ability and athletic ability there too. It's going to be a very difficult matchup, but it's one that Indiana has to win. Maryland's a team that also has not been losing by a lot. They've had some, I don't want to say bad losses, but not great losses. But every single game for the most part has been relatively close when you look at their overall schedule. And that's a concerning part for Indiana, right? I mean, you lose by 4 to Marquette. You lose by, I think it was 4 or 5 to Oregon. I think maybe 7 or 8 at Washington. They had the buzzer beater that they lost on to Northwestern. And I know they were super close in that Purdue game as well. So, all their games are, I think, decided within like 8 points. And for an Indiana team that goes on not only long scoreless droughts in second halves, but fails to respond after maybe the second or third punch that's thrown, that is exactly where Maryland typically takes advantage of their opponents. And so it's a game that Indiana absolutely has to have. You would hope that they come, fully prepared for this one, especially playing at home, especially with the last time they were inside of Assembly Hall and what happened there, and try to get some sort of momentum going into that extremely important, opportunistic, difficult stretch of basketball that has to be, I don't know of a stretch outside of the SEC, right? But specifically in the Big Ten that has that type of stretch at this point in the season. You would love it, right? If you were, more so battling for maybe, a 2 or 3 seed or a 1 seed, right? At this point in the year for the NCAA tournament, because 1 or 2 of these wins can cement that for you. But for a team that has really struggled with its consistency, you just have no idea what to expect. And you can easily just blow yourself right out of the waters from any sort of opportunity of making it into the NCAA tournament if you just get boat raced in the next 2 weeks.
Well, and that's the thing. I think we're going to know one of 2 things by February 11th or after February 11th, which is after you play Michigan State. You're going to know after these next 5 games, one of 2 things, whether or not Indiana can or will make the tournament, because there's enough here that if you win 4 out of 5, you've all of a sudden jumped into a whole different conversation of what the possibility is for the postseason. But if things go kind of how maybe we expect them to, which is not the way that we would want them to, I would say, we'll know by, again, February 11th, what kind of the future will look like. Not that Mike Woodson would be let go immediately after that, but if things have kind of played themselves out and your biggest opportunities to kind of make things up are gone, I think the writing will kind of be on the wall at that point for what may be coming in the off season for Indiana basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, could be the defining stretch if there is still some, hope left for Mike Woodson. Unfortunately, I think the writing may be on the wall
It
at
may
this
already
at
be
this
there.
point.
I just tend to
Um,
I tend to try to look from different angles if I can, and I've been more pessimistic about this team than I anticipated coming into the season. But I hate. I just don't feel like it's always easy just to write off everything when you still have 10, 11 games in front of you. Even though we do know, like you mentioned, this team does have an identity. The identity is inconsistency. And the one way that they could really change the narrative is to become a consistent team in a good way, of course. But again, that remains to be seen at this point.
yeah, exactly. And so that, I mean, again, you have the opportunities right in front of you. You would love to have this for any sort of team that is on the bubble, to have this sort of stretch, because you really do control your own destiny at this point if you can win a couple of these games, because these aren't fringe top 25 teams. These are legit top 15, top 10 teams almost in the country in almost any given game for the next 3 weeks. Obviously, outside of that, the Maryland game, but you have all the opportunities in the world in order to reach what you want to reach, and that's the NCAA tournament. The team has the talent to do so. They should be a team that makes the NCAA tournament, but obviously at this point the inconsistencies just outweigh the talent, and obviously some of the coaching decisions as well. So they need to grab two or three of those if they want a shot. But it all
Yeah.
starts on Sunday with Maryland. If they're not able to secure that one, then it's probably a difficult road and difficult path to get back up top there.
I want to ask you one football question before we wrap this thing up. There's been a lot of chatter with Bryant Haynes over the last few weeks. First, it was the Penn State job. Now it's potentially with the Notre Dame job, and I'm referring to their open defensive coordinator positions, of course. Do you think that's anything to be worried about, or do you think it's more of just a good on Indiana for what they've done on the field over the last season?
Yeah, I think it's just for what they've done, right? I mean, Brian Haynes isn't going to be there forever.
Yeah.
If he is,
but most people, I feel like, would assume if he's going to jump anywhere before a head coaching position.
Yeah, but we've seen. I don't want to say it's difficult to say a lateral move because it's Penn State football and Indiana football, but obviously the way the season went, the way that Kurt Cignetti's brought additional revenue and ability for the salaries for his assistants, right? It's much more probably of not a level playing field, but it's much closer to that than what it used to be. We just saw, obviously, for different reasons in that, but obviously Tom Allen leaving Penn State after 1 year to go to Clemson, obviously to be closer to family and stuff like that. So you never know what's going to happen, but I wouldn't be worried either way. He's not gonna stay in Bloomington forever, and that's a good thing. He's way too good to just remain a defensive coordinator. But I think he, will be intact here moving forward, and we'll see what happens after another expected to be successful year for Indiana.
Alec, I appreciate your time as always. Go kick some ass in some rec volleyball.
Absolutely, I'll try.
A big thank you, as always, to Alec Lasley, the man who cuts the paycheck, as they say, for coming on and taking some time to talk Indiana basketball. No matter how good things or bad things are. And you could tell, even though it felt like in that interview, I was trying to stay more on the positive and even more so maybe neutral side of things. You could tell that Alec really, I felt like he really wanted to just go in on Mike Woodson or on Indiana basketball in general, the issues that have really been going on. And I think we're not too far from there. And this is something that I was going to mention uh, before we got to that interview, and then I just got lost in my train of thought. But I think after this stretch of games that is coming up, we could even include with Maryland because it is. I mean, if you do lose that game, it just adds to the pressure that is coming forward. Let's just theoretically, though, say Indiana wins Sunday. And then the stretch of games that includes 3 of 4 on the road. And then I believe you got UCLA somewhere in there as well. That stretch right there, 4 or 5 game stretch, we will know kind of the destiny of this team after those results. I say that, but then I feel like there's a scenario where Indiana wins like, I don't know, 2 out of the 4 and maybe things are a little more. I don't know. I feel like if they went 2 of 4, that would still. Indiana has a lot of ground to make up when it comes to, making the tournament. Like they don't have a bad record, but they don't have a lot of good wins. They find themselves in the same position they've been in really every year of the Mike Woodson era, which is where they just don't have the marquee wins on the schedule, but they don't have any bad losses. It's such a weird place to be in. With this Mike Woodson, this era that we've seen over the last 4 years. Because none of the teams have been bad, but none of them have been really, really good. I think you could say that year 2 under Mike Woodson, that team was really good. It underachieved a little bit, but the team overall was pretty good back in his second season. And really just everything else has been kind of ho-hum. And I remember that first year was really highlighted by the sweep of Purdue. That was really what got people going in year 1. I believe that was year 1, right? Yeah. Because you had Jalen Hood, Shafina. Why am I thinking that was year 2? I don't know. I'm starting to get things mixed up. But none of that matters. Just some speculation, thinking about things. I want to get into some of the YouTube comments. One in particular that I mentioned, I may have even mentioned both of these on the show where things got cut by accident. But I do want to read this one because I think it's kind of where most people stood, at least where people stood a few weeks ago and maybe where they stand now. But this is from Leslie 3820. Leslie says, I don't want the bottom to fall out, even though I think that is the most likely scenario. I'd rather have some type of salvageable ending to the season. Hopefully in that scenario, Woodson would be able to retire with his reputation repaired. If I was a bettor, I'd say it's just going to spiral downhill from here. I think that really is, Leslie. I think that is probably if that were to play out in that way, that's the scenario where you would please the most people, because the fans that just can't help but root for the best no matter what, that means that they get to enjoy the rest of this season without, angering the people who are on the side where people say, well, Woodson will never be able to get us to this height, because that's more of the realistic side. And I say realistic, it's more of those who look at things from like, hey, what do we got? Let's look at the results from the past. What is Mike Woodson's true ceiling? That's really where that comes from, versus the side of, let's just be a fan and root for them to do well no matter what. And it's good to have both aspects of that fan base. I tend to think that I fall into both categories depending on, because I want the team to do well and to continue to do well, but at the same time, I want what's best for the program as a whole, which is to get back to what they're known for, competing for Elite Eights and Final Fours, and even beyond that, as often as they can. That's why when I go back, I think I've used this comparison before with Indiana football and Tom Allen. I love Tom Allen as a head coach and as a human being as well. He seemed like a very genuine dude, and it was cool to see the success he had. But when things went south, as much as I wanted him to do well, I wanted Indiana to be able to have a higher ceiling. And I don't think we knew that the football ceiling could be raised to the level that it currently is at. But now that we've seen that on the football side of things, we look at basketball And all of us are thinking the same thing. Why can't what happened with football be replicated with basketball? Why can't we just move on from this mediocrity and find somebody who can truly rejuvenate this program and get Indiana back to where we think they belong, which is near the top of college basketball? And so, Leslie, back to your initial point, like it would be great if Indiana did well enough to make the tournament. Just say they were an 8 or a 9 seed, somewhere just kind of like it's not really the best seed, but you're also not really on the bubble anymore if you're 8 or 9. But your reward, if you will, as an 8 or 9 is playing a 1 seed in the second round if you even win your first game. So let's say Indiana does that, and then they're just, I don't know, let's just say they bow out of the round of 32 to whatever 1 seed they would end up facing. And then, there's so much noise from both sides, and Mike Woodson just says, you know what? This isn't for me anymore, and I don't want to, sour things more so than I already almost did. I'll just, we'll hang it. He wouldn't say it like that, of course. Maybe that's the thought process that he has, and decides to just hang it up, and Indiana moves on. I do think that probably is the best way for things to end, calmly. And then everybody gets what they want, right? It goes back to me saying, like, those who just want the team to succeed, they get that portion for this season. And then those who really want to see the bar raised, and get rightfully so, because I'm in that camp as well. Those they get what they want as well, instead of having to suffer through another year of what ifs with Mike Woodson if they don't like where things are going at that point. So wanted to bring that comment up. I'm honestly not even sure if that's the exact way that I articulated it last week. I mean, it's the same. I tried to make the same points, and you guys will never even know what I even said. Then I can sometimes one thing that's interesting about this profession of mine, sometimes you talk and it's not that you're just saying things that don't make any sense, but you just say so much you don't always remember what you say. But sometimes it just feels good, and that's a good enough indicator to know whether or not something was worth putting out there onto the interwebs, the YouTubes, if you will. So yeah, thank you, Leslie, for the comment. Apologies for not for you not being able to see this last week. And I hope that you're able to watch this episode, and, feel free to leave any other comments that you may have. But here's what Mike Shenanigans also had to say. This may have been on, I may have read this one as well. I don't necessarily remember, but hey, we're going to read it again. Mike says, I have so much I could say, but he's not going to. He's got an angry face on the comment as well. He then goes on to say, I have been a diehard IU fan for 43 years and have all kinds of IU memorabilia and even a piece of the old floor of the basketball court. That's pretty awesome. I have been disappointed with some seasons, and even seasons I knew they would not be good, but with the money that was spent, this is disheartening under the staff. Absolutely. I think that might be the biggest offender of everything coming into the season. There's that, along with the lack of freshman recruiting. But the amount of money that was spent on this roster only to kind of get the same results that you got last season, at least up to this point, that I see why that would be, kind of the biggest sign of everything. Like, hey, this isn't working. You went out and bought a team that was a preseason top 15, 16 team, if I remember correctly, and you don't even look like you belong in that category anymore. When your preseason level is that means you should be vying for or expected to get to the second weekend when you get to the postseason. And now we're talking about whether or not this team will actually get into the postseason, which, when it comes to Indiana standards, that's not what we like to talk about or should really ever be talking about. The baseline for every Indiana team should be make the tournament. I want to say comfortably. I really think that should be the baseline for Indiana basketball. Yeah, there will be years, no matter who the coach is, in times where you're just down, right? But the overall general standard minimum should be Indiana is good enough every single season to get into the tournament, and it not really be a question that they get in. And we've only had that once under Mike Woodson in year 2. Was it again? Now I don't want to sit here and get my years mixed up. 1 year they were in the first 4, another year they were in pretty comfortably, and then last season they were not in at all. And right now it's starting to look like they might be in that conversation as well. So, but either way, yes, I agree with you, Mike. That is a very disheartening thing when it comes to, kind of reflecting on where things are at right now and where they may or may not end up going as the season continues on. That Sunday game, man, and then even the games ahead after that. We'll know by February, or I'd say that's in a week. We'll know by a couple weeks into February or a week in February, probably where things are heading. And maybe we know now. Maybe I'm just in denial. Maybe I'm giving this team too many chances. I just don't like to look at the schedule and write off everything when there's still that much time left in the season. So again, maybe that makes me, I almost said ignorant. Maybe it is ignorant. Who knows? But we'll leave comments at that for now, and we'll get into a couple of other non-Indiana men's basketball things as we get ready to wrap up here on a Friday. But one thing we'll end actually while we're talking basketball, I'll go ahead and do our non-revenue shout. I shouldn't even really call it non-revenue shout outs right now, because we're really only looking at one sport that we don't talk about nearly enough. And it's not even a different sport. It's women's basketball. It's my show. I do it the way that I want. And I know women's basketball has become a lot more popular over the last really couple of years, 2 to 3 years, with the emergence of Caitlin Clark and some of the other stars that have come and gone through the college ranks, Angel Reese. But I just do not have the time and energy to watch more than what I already do. That's what it is. So the very least I could do is follow along with the results and shout them out whenever I can. Not that they're looking for a shout out from yours truly here on HoosierIllustrated.com, but hey, I can at least do my part when it comes to, and I don't even want to call it covering the team. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just kind of reading results and letting you know how things are going with them. But yeah, since we last checked up on women's basketball, I believe it was coming off their loss to UCLA. They've won 2 of 4. They won back-to-back road games at Northwestern, 68-64, and then at number 23 Iowa, 74-67. And unfortunately, since then they lost 2 home games. Lost to Illinois, 68-54, and then to number 4 USC, 73-66. They go on a 2-game road trip out west, beginning with Oregon tonight, and then they'll face Washington, I believe, on Monday before returning home for a couple of home games. So that's where Indiana women's basketball is right now. They are 12-6 overall. And what does that leave? Yeah, 4-3 in the Big Ten, tied for 10th, I believe, or they might be solely. No, they're solely in 10th. So definitely a step backward for Indiana women's basketball so far this year, but had their fair share of ups and downs. Definitely. It's tough when you lose what Indiana women's basketball lost from last year to this year. It's not as easy, I feel like, to make up for loss of production in the women's game, just because there's not always as much dominant talent to spread around. It's a lot more difficult to find the diamonds in the rough, if you will. So yeah, there's our women's basketball shout out. And then lastly, let's talk a little bit about, after I get a cup of coffee or sip of coffee here, NFC AFC championship in the NFL this weekend. I tell you what, I know I've been fine the last few weeks, but my throat is still sore from when I was coughing so much in those previous few weeks. I hope by the time we get to Monday that my voice and just the overall, everything could be back to normal, because it is very, I know I talked about my bout with COVID a few years ago. This is very, and again, I never found out if I had COVID or not, but the timeline of everything is almost identical. The couple of weeks of coughing and then just never really feeling up to full strength until the end of the month. And again, we're almost at January, which I also gotten it previously at the beginning of January a few years ago. So without testing for it, I guess I can assume it, but it doesn't really matter. And again, I'm just kind of veering off into territory that you may or may not care about. But hey, it's fun. It's fine. I like to share random things about my life here every now and again, especially when it affects the show, like my voice. So after those couple of sips of coffee, AFC, NFC championship games in football, the most popular sport in the world, the NFL, right? Or I say the world, it's not. It has the most popular Super Bowl, the most popular, most watched individual game in sports, but of course soccer, football, if you will, the most popular worldwide sport. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what do I think is going to happen in Commanders, Eagles, and Bills, Chiefs. Well, I know I'm rooting for Commanders and Bills to be the Super Bowl matchup. How likely is it? I don't know, but it must be likely enough for me to take Commanders plus 6.5 and Bills plus 2.5. Because I think we know the Bills defeated the Chiefs earlier this year up in Buffalo. I believe it's like 30-23 or something along those lines. But this is at Kansas City. And we know how the Chiefs are. We know how they are in the playoffs, and we know that they're aspiring to be the first ever 3-time consecutive Super Bowl champion. So it'd be very difficult for the Bills to outright win. That's why I decided to take them to cover 2.5 points. Hopefully, at the very least they can do is stay in that spread or within that spread. And then the Commanders are just hot, man. I think a lot of people think that things may come to an end against the Eagles here. Now they're 1-1 against them this season. They did beat them back at home. It's because they are division rivals. But I think the Jaden Daniels train is just now leaving the station. I think this game's going to be competitive. Part of me wanted to take them outright too against the Eagles. I think the Eagles are good, but they've had some letdowns at some point this year. Jalen Hurts, for some reason, he's not. I mean, he does fine, but I feel like he gets overlooked when it comes to like what Saquon Barkley has been able to do with the Eagles. So if they find a way to just slow him down, that may be the key for the Commanders to really getting the upset and getting a rookie quarterback to the Super Bowl, which would be pretty amazing if you're a Commanders fan. So I'm taking Bills to cover. I'm taking Commanders to cover, and I'm hoping they both win outright. I don't know how much that is likely to happen, but we'll have to wait and see. And with that, we're going to wrap up this week of episodes of In Touch with Indiana Sports. I appreciate you sticking around, and feel free to leave a comment if you want to respond to anything I may have talked about today or things coming up. And I look forward to next week's worth of shows, and we'll have hopefully a good lineup of guests for you moving forward as well. So until Monday, or until our post-game wrap-up show on Sunday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.